In the mid-1970s, Public Law 94-142 established the rights of individuals with disabilities to a free, appropriate, and public education, or FAPE. School-based programs for individuals with disabilities were established. An early issue to be addressed was location of services. Special education services were often viewed as a place rather than adaptable supports that travel with individual students. Intensive supports were often equated with separate classrooms or even separate school buildings. The disadvantages of this place-based system are: 1. Students needed to be placed in special education before any services could be delivered, sort of a wait and fail model. 2. Students at risk for behavioral, academic, and social difficulties failed to receive needed supports in general education. 3. Students with disabilities had little access to the general education curriculum. 4. If the goal is functioning in general education settings, the setting differences between special education and general education likely caused issues with generalization of behavioral, academic, and social domain areas. Finally, special educators were often viewed as the sole person responsible for intervention delivery. Quite frankly, we just didn't draw upon our expertise that was available within schools. Special education is about providing supports to students where they need them most. Supports can be used to address difficulties across domains such as academics, behavior, and social, and locations such as general education settings, the community, special education settings, etc. In many ways, this makes a great deal of sense. If a goal is enhanced academic performance in a general education setting, supports can be provided in general education settings to help achieve this goal. Special education is also a team-based enterprise that brings skills from a variety of professions to support students. For example, general education teachers have expertise in the general education curriculum and also know what is needed to succeed in general education classrooms. Special educators know how to adapt instruction and manage behavior. Team-based approaches leverage the strengths of all professions in order to develop supports for students. A key advantage of special education as supports is that expertise can be used in both an intervention and preventive capacity. Our history and student needs have led us to a place where we need to ask key questions such as, how do we best get a variety of support services to students at risk or with disabilities in least restrictive settings? How can we individualize supports to maximize effectiveness? How can we act to prevent ongoing issues from getting worse and thus requiring more intensive supports later? One possible solution came out of the model of prevention for public health. The basic idea is to establish preventive strategies with the goal of reducing the number of individuals who eventually require intensive medical care. A real-world example is reducing smoking. Preventive strategies such as advertisements, educational programs, and laws are implemented. These preventive strategies will reduce, but not likely eliminate smoking. Some individuals will smoke and likely need medical care at some point. The next level of care could entail seeing a doctor regularly and/or using cessation medications. Finally, a smaller number of people may require more intensive treatment. In summary, preventive strategies are effective for a large number of people. Some people will need intermediate level care, and even fewer will need more intensive medical care. This tiered approach has been adapted for use in schools. A variety of approaches fall under the umbrella of multi-tiered systems of support. Response to intervention, school-wide positive behavior support, and positive behavior intervention and supports are just a few examples of multi-tiered systems of supports. Although some details and focal points differ across these individual systems, they all provide preventive and intervention supports through a tiered system of increasing supports. The basic model of a tiered approach has 3 tiers, or sometimes 4. A key concept is that the intensity of supports increases as one moves through tiers. So the supports provided in Tier 1 are often preventive in nature and are less intensive than Tier 2. Tier 3 supports are more intensive than Tier 2. A rule of thumb is that 80% of students will be responsive to Tier 1 intervention, 15% to Tier 2, and 5% responsive to Tier 3. We'll take a deeper dive into examples of tiered supports in upcoming slides. More recent models stress the importance of supports across tiers and domain areas such as behavioral, academic, and social areas of functioning. There are several key components of multi-tiered systems. First, as discussed earlier, the intensity of supports increases throughout tiers. Second, the process is data-driven. Identifying who needs supports via screening, such as the early warning system, and then evaluating the effects of those supports is critical. Professionals need to know if supports are effective in a given tier or if the student should be moved on to another tier where the intensity of supports is greater. Third, the interventions in each tier must be evidence-based. Fourth, team-based discussions help to determine the best course of action for students. Teams evaluate the data and then match evidence-based supports to individual students. Fifth, multi-tiered systems of supports are generally implemented across the entire school. The school-wide implementation provides for high levels of continuity across teachers and settings. Finally, as discussed earlier, the tiers are designed around preventive, Tier 1, and intervention, Tiers 2 and 3 framework. As discussed in earlier modules, school environments can be complex. It is important that we account for various domains of functioning such as behavioral, academic, and social, as well as other correlated factors that impact functioning within these contexts. Knowledge of contextual interactions is a key element for adapting interventions. The following example will help illustrate this point. Sammy is generally late to class and once there fails to get her materials ready to start the lesson. There are two levels of knowledge that can be used to address this issue. Knowing that there is a problem is important and that teachers need to know that an intervention is needed. However, merely knowing that there is a problem does little to help us individualize interventions. If we stop with problem identification or knowing, we can develop an intervention, such as reinforcing behaviors related to being on time and readiness. This intervention may or may not work. Unfortunately, just labeling the problem doesn't tell us much about why the problem is occurring. How would the teacher's intervention change if the following information were available? Number 1, Sammy only has these issues in math, a class where she is performing poorly. 2, some of Sammy's classmates make fun of her when she seeks extra help in math. This additional information could lead to an intervention that considers the academic difficulties that Sammy is experiencing, as well as the social dynamics in play. An off-the-shelf intervention would likely not be as effective as one that accounts for these key elements. A key question often asked when developing interventions for students is, what is wrong with the student? A better question, however, is what is wrong with the environment? Adapting interventions is about understanding the context in which behavior occurs. There are two foundational ideas regarding adaptation: person-environment fit and systems of correlated constraints. In person-environment fit, we are looking at skills or other factors that lead to a fit or a lack of fit within a given environment. The key question here is, what is needed to function in a given environment, and how can we support students in acquiring or performing those behaviors? In systems of correlated constraints, multiple areas of functioning work together to support appropriate or inappropriate behavior. In our earlier example of Sammy, a probable academic issue, difficulties in math, was related to a behavioral, late to class, and other social issues. Each of these variables became linked such that the academic difficulties were made worse by behavioral and social difficulties. Effective interventions, then, must address issues at each of these levels: academic, behavioral, and social. A first step in developing interventions, regardless of tier, is to assess students across the base, behavioral, academic, and social domains. A few key questions can be used to guide the assessment process. When examining behavior, ask, what is the student's current behavioral skill set? What is expected in the environment? What supports are available in the environment? When looking at the academic domain, what is the student's current academic skill set? What is expected academically in the environment? And what supports are available to help that student academically? In terms of the social domain, what is the student's current social skill set? What is expected socially in the environment? And what social supports are available in that environment? After thinking about those initial questions and having some idea of what is expected in each domain, teachers can begin to address support issues in each area. Behavioral domain, teachers can teach new adaptive behaviors via differential reinforcement. In the academic domain, teachers can teach skills that are linked to prior learning via explicit instruction. They can increase engagement via opportunities to respond. In the social domain, teachers can teach appropriate skills that are valued in settings. Teachers can also monitor and leverage social dynamics. Tier 1 supports are often considered preventive in nature. There are a variety of supports available. Some specific examples include defining and teaching expectations. School and classroom expectations must be clearly stated. Identify what you would like students to do and then teach those expectations. And I mean really teach those expectations. A common mistake is going over expectations and rules on the first day of class and just leaving it at that. Teach expectations by giving examples and modeling and tying expectations into student behavior across the entire year. Link the classroom expectations to student behavior on a daily basis. Classroom routines are also a good preventive measure. As teachers, we sometimes have a mindset that every day needs to be brand new and unique. While interesting and novel activities are important, we also must realize that students can benefit from predictability and structure. Some students have a difficult time with, for example, getting started with class. It just sort of happens for these students. Having a predictable routine when students enter the room can help support these students. Oftentimes, students who have academic difficulties avoid engaging in public responses because their learning history is one of difficulty and failure. When a teacher asks, "What is the capital of Pennsylvania?" they slide down in their seat in an effort to avoid being called upon. Opportunities to respond is a great predictor of academic success. Students who answer teacher questions and practice skills generally outperform students who do not. A key then is to help all students take academic risks by providing opportunities to respond that cut across different skill levels and contain needed supports. Feedback is another key component that can help students across academic, behavioral, and social domains. There really can't be teaching without feedback. Good feedback is immediate, corrective, and positive. If a student needs their behavior corrected, do it immediately, correct the behavior, tell the student what they need to be doing, and be positive, reinforce the new behavior. Same thing with academics and same thing with social domains. Again, adapting supports to match the demands of the context is the key. Tier 2 intervention is delivered to students with whom Tier 1 supports are ineffective and often starts with an intervention team meeting. The intervention team examines data from Tier 1 approaches and then develops a plan for the student. Whereas Tier 1 supports generally focus on prevention, Tier 2 supports are generally more individualized and focus on direct intervention. There are two general approaches for intervention development in Tier 2. A standard treatment protocol approach and a problem-solving approach. In a standard treatment protocol approach, a standardized evidence-based intervention is implemented with fidelity with small groups of students. Dosage, intensity, and group size is often manipulated in an effort to positively impact students. For example, a student may receive additional instructional time in smaller groups on key academic, social, or behavioral domain areas. In a problem-solving approach, team members examine data, consider context, and suggest appropriate approaches. There are advantages and disadvantages of each model. For example, standard treatment protocols are likely straightforward to implement, but may not be as individualized as needed. On the other hand, a strict problem-solving approach may examine individual factors. However, it also requires extensive knowledge of available interventions. In practice, most support systems use a combination of these two approaches. Regardless of the type of approach used, interventions should account for key areas of needed supports across environments. It is not enough to settle on one area as a focal point for intervention, such as academics or behavior. Going back to the idea of correlated constraints, effective intervention should address students by setting up supports that connect across behavioral, academic, and social domains of functioning. Interventions in Tier 2 can vary. This is an area of needed research. That said, overall, Tier 2 approaches should be evidence-based and also work to prevent developmental cascades, such as preventing one area of difficulty from spilling over to impact other areas, much like the example of Sammy, where an academic issue spilled over to cause social and behavioral issues. Some general intervention areas within Tier 2 include strategies to promote behavioral engagement. We want to get our students engaged with materials, whether it's in behavioral domain, academic domain, or social domain. We can teach and reinforce desired behaviors. Mentoring strategies such as check-in and check-out can be used where adults work closely with the student on goals. The student may check in with the adult first thing in the morning and then check out at the end of the day to evaluate progress. Another way to promote engagement is through self-management strategies. Number 2, strategies to enhance academic engagement. More instructional time, smaller groups, feedback, using behavioral momentum to kind of build this momentum of academic responding. Opportunities to respond, increasing opportunities to respond, and using explicit instructional practices. Also, strategies to promote social engagement. Teacher understanding of social dynamics in the classroom is the first step there. Teaching and reinforcing desired behaviors, changing seating and grouping arrangements, anything to manage and leverage the social dynamics in the classroom. Tier 3 supports are intensive and individualized. At this point, Tier 1 and Tier 2 supports have not achieved their desired outcomes. In many ways, the developmental cascade that Tier 2 supports were attempting to prevent has already occurred. Let's think about our earlier example of Sammy. Without or with ineffective intervention, Sammy's academic difficulties could spread beyond math and continue to negatively impact behavior and social opportunities. We can also bring possible issues outside of school as variables that may also have a negative impact, such as a family situation or mental health issues. Tier 3 supports may involve reorganizing academic, behavioral, and social domains. These supports generally require a team of individuals who have expertise related to specific supports. So, for example, a special educator could bring expertise in the area of instruction. A behavior analyst could bring support for behavior plans, and a counselor could assist with mental health issues. The key with Tier 3 is highly individualized, function-based interventions with a focus on reorganizing developmental pathways. In this module, we discussed the idea of multi-tiered systems of support. Multi-tiered systems of support provide all students with needed supports across a variety of settings. This is a critical move beyond special education as a place-based system. A next generation of this system, tiered systems of adapted support, goes beyond a one-size-fits-all approach for each tier and requires professionals to adapt interventions to meet the needs of individual students within specific contexts. Think about all the individual students that you have known in your career. Now think of all the locations in which you have worked with those students: classrooms, community, home, places within the school, etc. Students and contexts are often unique, and the interactions that students have within these contexts compounds the complexity. Effective interventions account for these complexities by addressing difficulties across multiple areas of functioning within a tier-based system.